a lot of that off of your agendas. What we are going to do, however, is we are going to continue to have a presentation by the, I'm not gonna say this well, but the the citizenship update will go on. We are also going to have Joe Miskokomon come on and present, so he's going to be up next. After Joe, we're going to have an honor song, and we're going to have an honor song for 2 people. So I'll let Joe go ahead and present, and we'll take it away from there.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you, delegates, for this opportunity to speak to you. This morning we had a round table or a round discussion about many things, but one of the questions that was talked about is where in fact are we going to acquire capitalization for these projects, not only internal to the community, but the opportunities that are also presenting themselves external. We've heard many First Nation chiefs talk about how they've had to increase their consultation units in order to accommodate that along with economic development. Recognizing that there has been movement on both federal and provincial parts to increase a loan guarantee program provincially from $1 billion as announced last spring to $3 billion, and federally on the advancement of a federal loan guarantee program from $3 billion to $10 billion. And while that's all well and fine in terms of loan guarantees, it doesn't really solve the problem that we face collectively internally to our own communities, in as much as that you still have to borrow the money from somewhere, right? And the only thing that gives you is really kind of an insurance policy at the end of the day. So, while that might be good for some, it's not good for all, and particularly hard on smaller First Nations. So, within that, we also have a First Nation Finance Authority. That's essentially a loan that is cheaper than you can get in a commercial bank. So the loan rate now, currently, is 3.86% over 5 years, or 4.25% over a 10-year amortization of the loan. Those loans can be stretched out to 20, 25, and perhaps even 30 years, depending upon the size of the loan. But given there is a limitation to that, given that those limitations, again, really have to deal with your balance sheet. How much money is this actually going to take to borrow, in opposed to what are you currently operating on your balance sheet? So, when we look at major projects that are going to require billions of dollars, not millions, but billions of dollars, it's pretty clear, in my view, that the First Nations are not going to have accessibility to that kind of money under the current funding structures that we have today. And so we're essentially locked out. So how are we going to solve this problem? So what I've done is I've called for, at this point, I've called for the Premier and Ontario to give us $1 billion. That's B billion. And part of that strategy is to design a bonding structure much like FNFA. And once a bonding structure is put in place, you can leverage that money anywhere from 5 to 7 times. We also have money. And so it calls for the First Nations that want to participate, that want to be willing participants, to put money up front also. It's the idea of pooling money in order to start moving on projects. How is this different than any other ones. First of all, there's money up front. It's on the table, both federally and perhaps provincially, but also with First Nation contribution. It also calls about putting out a bonding structure. I've already contacted bonding agencies that have the license to do that. This could be done through what is called a special purpose vehicle. And in effect, what we would create is a First Nation sovereign wealth fund. So, here are the opportunities that we see in front of us. Currently on the opportunities, when having a pooling of that amount of money, it doesn't limit us. Did you know, this is an actual fact, do you know that even the First Nation Finance Authority is not allowed to loan you money to fix your infrastructure? That's not the way the legislation is prepared. Banking, there's the Banking Act of Canada. The Banking Act of Canada realistically applies to Section 88 of the Indian Act. And Section 88 of the Indian Act says nothing can be seized, chattel, or mortgage on an Indian reserve. They're prohibited. So legally, by law, the current lending institutions that are now available to us are legally, by law, not available to us. We need a different structure. We need a structure that's going to be owned, controlled by participating First Nation members, that is going to be a part of the sovereign wealth pool. So, when we go to looking at this opportunity, it creates an opportunity for, first of all, we own one here in Ontario, preferably within the Anishinabek Nation. We're able to reinvest into our own communities. And we're equally able to invest in other major projects that's around us. People ask about how we're going to get into mining. None of our balance sheets can even come close to get into mining. None of our balance sheets can come close to nuclear. Where a small nuclear reactor, which is being built now in Darlington, is at the range of $40 billion on construction. This then gives us the investment as a collective to get into that. Next one, please. Too far. So, why we call it a sovereign wealth fund is that's exactly what it is. We write the parameters of what that sovereign wealth fund would look like. We write the parameters on what we're able to lend each other money to. And what it becomes, so that it's not simply a one project investment, we would have an asset management manager, where in fact it becomes a pool of investments, where everyone would own a certain portion of these investments. And why is that important? Because the full rate of return would come back to you. Right now, if you go out, you have to commercially borrow money. You've got to pay the bank because the bank says we have to pay our shareholders. When you go to FNFA and borrow against them, even at 3.86%, they're borrowing money on the international basis. That's what they're paying out on the international basis. If we have this pooled amount, what in fact we are doing is we're actually borrowing against ourselves. And so that investment stays 100% within the pool itself. And it's not based on how big your balance sheet is today. It's based on the opportunity that is in front of you. So as an example, I'll use my own community. We settled $140 million over the last 18 years of land claims, which is investment, which is locked up in trusts, in 3 separate trusts. Each one of those trusts has trust managers, trust investors, and trustees. Each one operates in a separate function. They don't operate collectively because every trust is a snapshot in time. It's what is current within that community on that given time. And so you build that trust around what is currently required at the time of settlement. It's not flexible so that you can move money around within it. It's for basic purposes. And every trust is a bit different. So right now, we're paying 3 separate managers, 3 separate trusts, and it's getting duplicated and replicated over and over again. And the cost of that, I've made arrangements with an outside asset manager that over a course of 10 years, they will go from a partnership agreement to the First Nation full control of managing our own. That gives opportunity that we haven't had before to bring our young people into the financial management markets where in fact we would end up owning a financial management asset-based company. That's the blue sky that I'm talking about. That's the vision that I'm talking about. Not to have loans that are backed by government, but in fact have real investments that we're not only investing in the outside economy, we're investing within our own economy. We're growing capacity within outside asset firms. We're actually going to buy that asset firm and it becomes ours. And what does it do? It gives a little light to the next generation, for the next generation to come in and be our own bosses with our own money. Why are we allowing money to seep through our hands and pay other people when we could be, with a strategy of 10 years, starting to prepare that to have our own? And why a sovereign wealth fund? Because I'll tell you this, chiefs, we already got one. We have a sovereign wealth fund, and I brought this to the chiefs of Ontario some 15 years ago. It was passed at a resolution that I moved, and you'll remember this, to buy Ontario Hydro shares. At that time, and Pat knows this, at that time, the Ontario Hydro shares were selling at $24.60 a share. At the end of the day, we ended up owning preferred shares at $18. At that point, we collectively within the First Nations of Ontario had to borrow $259 million plus debt that never came out of our pockets. It was a debt. In this past summer, if you were at that Sovereign Wealth Fund annual assembly, our Sovereign Wealth Fund today is over $750 million. That's how you grow wealth. This is literally the same application with a couple twists, in as much as that we would be the people that would own the bonds and sell bonds on a global basis, and we would be the ones in 10 years' time that would own our own management firm on how to asset manage our own money. So you look at yesterday's announcement on a good and bad basis. The federal government announced that First Nation funding is going to be cut by $2.3 billion. And people are going to be wondering, where are those cuts going to come from? I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't start developing our own core initiatives through having an alternative pathway to intergenerational success, that we will never hit our values for the inherent right of First Nations to manage our own wealth. That we would never become our own general stewards of our own wealth. And quite truthfully, we wouldn't even be able to action free, prior, and informed consent, because the government is going to say, thank you very much, but we're going to take those minerals at any rate. And the benefits would be to develop our own management, develop our own First Nation rights holders, and have our own institutions. I believe we should start now. So when another federal government comes along and says, we're going to cut your budget by $2.3 billion, what is our backup? At this point, nothing. How do we insulate ourselves against that? We create our own intergenerational wealth. We need to start now. I said that yesterday. I said that this morning. I believe in that vision. I believe we have the strength and the power to control a lot of the economy of Canada, but we need to start now. I'll end there. Wherever my chairperson is, if you have any questions, I have a contact sheet that has been sent to you with a high description on. We'll be organizing early in next year. I fully intend to meet with the Premier through the assistance of our Grand Council Chief. This has already been, you've got a 20-page document in your handout. That has already been submitted to government. And I can tell you this, there is already another sovereign wealth fund that is owned by First Nation people in Canada that want to join us. We have allies. Not just here, we have allies across this country, and we have allies in Treaty 6, and we have allies on the West Coast. I've already spoken to them. And if we can move along, they're quite prepared to join with us. If you think of it, where our strength based is, we have a First Nation Premier in Manitoba. They have First Nation wealth in Manitoba. It's time to unite. Miigwech.